When you walk into a bank building today, you see marble columns, high ceilings, and an aura of sanctity. Coincidence? Absolutely not. 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, temples were doing exactly this job, but on behalf of the gods. Money doesn't talk, history talks. And history tells us this. Our modern financial world was born on temple steps. For someone living around 3000 BC in cities like Uruk, Ur, and Babylon, religion and economy were not separate concepts. The temple wasn't just a place of prayer, it was simultaneously a central bank, landowner, employer, warehouse, regulatory authority, and tax office, all under one roof. The gods were the theoretical owners, the priests were the CEOs. This system didn't emerge by chance. The incentive structure was flawless. If you say your institution is run by the gods, compliance rates rise remarkably. No one dares not pay their debts to the gods. In modern terms, reputational risk was infinite. Why were temples so powerful? Because early city life was chaotic. Mesopotamia wasn't a unified nation, but city-states unable to share resources, struggling with droughts and wars. There was no strong secular government, but temples had everything: land, labor, warehouses, literacy, legitimacy, and most importantly, trust. Economic systems are built not on markets, but on trust. In ancient times, the source of trust was the gods. Today, it's central banks. Let's step inside the temple. Imagine Uruk in 3000 BC. At the top of the ziggurat is the god's shrine, but below is a completely economic machine. Priests and scribes walk around with clay tablets, recording incoming barley amounts, counting animals, calculating worker rations, writing labor contracts. Do you know why writing was invented? Not for poetry, for accounting. The oldest clay tablets aren't epics, they're receipts. This is ironic, but profoundly true. Civilization was built not on epic stories, but on Excel spreadsheets. Money doesn't talk, history talks. And history tells us the first words were sentences like, 50 measures of barley delivered this month. At the foundation of the system was land ownership. Temples owned vast lands. Legally, the lands belonged to the gods, the priests managed them on their behalf. Farmers rented their land from the temple, paying rent in barley, labor, or livestock. It didn't resemble modern taxation, but functionally it was the same, taking a share of production and redistributing it. Temples employed thousands of people: farmers, builders, shepherds, weavers, blacksmiths, scribes, guards, priests. In some cities, the temple payroll dwarfed all other economic actors. Workers were paid standard rations: barley, beer, oil, all carefully measured and recorded. This was the first wage system, and the incentive was clear: work regularly, eat regularly. But the innovation didn't stop there. Temples also functioned as banks. In their warehouses were citywide reserves of barley, silver, and goods. People stored their surplus at the temple because it was secure. This storage system naturally led to lending. If a farmer had a bad harvest, or a merchant needed barley for a trade expedition, they borrowed from the temple, with interest. If paying interest to a god sounds frightening, well, that was the point. In a world without credit scores or collateral, divine authority did the job. Debt tablets were incredibly detailed. Amounts, due dates, obligations, penalties. Some tablets even show early forms of compound interest. The temple became a financial center not because it was good at prayer, but because it was the only institution powerful enough to coordinate the economic lives of thousands of people. As temple economies grew wealthy, something inevitable happened. Political leaders noticed. Mesopotamian kings weren't absolute rulers. They needed legitimacy. And legitimacy resided in the temple. But beneath the spiritual language was something more practical. Kings needed the resources temples controlled: land, barley, labor, silver, scribes. That is, the financial system. Around 2350 BC, Sargon of Akkad did something revolutionary. He transferred the temple's economic power into the hands of the monarchy. He conquered Sumerian cities, seized temple wealth, integrated it into a centralized state. His strategy was simple. If temples control the economy and he controls the temples, he controls the economy. It worked for a while, but it created a new tension: the struggle between religious economic power and secular political power. This pressure created one of the most interesting economic developments in history: royal debt cancellation. If you think modern governments manipulate financial systems for political gain, Mesopotamian kings were masters of this craft. When debts accumulated, when peasants lost their land, when inequality threatened stability, the king could issue a clean slate decree, completely erasing debts, interest, obligations. Some call this the first bailout. But unlike today's, it wasn't banks being rescued, it was people. The logic was simple. If too many farmers became indebted to wealthy elites or temples, they'd be forced into slavery. If that happened, the king would lose taxpayers, soldiers, and stability. The incentive mechanism was clear: cancel debts to prevent economic collapse. How familiar does this sound to modern ears? Financial crisis hits, the state intervenes, debts are erased, the system is preserved. Money doesn't talk, history talks, and it tells us we've been using the same playbook for thousands of years. Over centuries, temples and kings developed a tense but shared partnership. Temples still conducted most of economic administration. They employed the scribes, who ran the first bureaucracies. They managed redistribution during famine, coordinated large-scale labor projects like irrigation, provided credit, collected interest. But kings increasingly diverted more to palace accounts, controlled trade routes, used temple wealth to finance armies. Mesopotamia invented not just the first economy, but the first state takeover of an economy. And if you strip away the mythology, what remains is a machine: administration, writing, storage, accounting, labor, surplus, the backbone of civilization. When you look at our modern financial world, central banks, bureaucracy, tax systems, national reserves, legal codes, you're not looking at inventions of recent centuries. You're looking at an ancient operating system created by temples 5,000 years ago and upgraded by kings. The temple's land ownership became modern states, public land, infrastructure, natural resources. Temple credit became banking. Temple rations became wages. Temple accounting became bureaucracy. Temple ideology became political legitimacy. Economies are not built on markets. They're built on institutions that can organize human behavior at scale. Temples did this first. Then states took over. Now corporations are doing it. We like to imagine modern economies are entirely rational, financial, data-driven. But the temple economy shows us something uncomfortable. Economic power is never purely economic. It's cultural, it's psychological, it's ideological. People trusted temples not because they understood accounting, but because they believed the gods were watching. Today people trust currencies, banks, laws for equally abstract reasons: faith, legitimacy, narrative. So money doesn't talk, history talks. And history tells us this: money operates on belief in every age. If you separate belief from institution, the system collapses. If you abuse power, the system collapses. If you lose administrative discipline, the system collapses. Ancient Mesopotamia learned this the hard way. Through debt crises, inequality, political chaos, economic resets. The world has changed, but the mechanics haven't. Temples became the state. Scribes became bureaucrats. Barley accounts became balance sheets. Ritual became legitimacy. And the system, our system, evolved from there. Old money,